groups. And so when you suggested talking about Catholic Islamic apologetics, I was like, oh, yeah, that's awesome, because that's an area I don't think a lot of Catholics are engaged in.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think everyone has their own specialty, and I think there are some Islamic Catholics, but I don't know a lot, to be honest. I have a friend who is an Islamic expert and authority on the subject, but I don't know too many.
No, not at all. And it is a specialized field to study. You know, you can handle objections to a certain level, but you really need to know Islam from the inside out, kind of, before you can become really competent.
Exactly. Not to mention that they talk different than everyone else. They act different than everyone else. Their argumentation and style is different than everyone else. It's a completely different animal altogether many times.
Yeah. And one big problem is all the source documents are in Arabic, which even people who speak Arabic don't like speaking Arabic because it's incredibly hard language. Yeah. So so there's that language barrier too. Trying to learn about Islam.
And I don't speak Arabic, but I have my unholy Quran here. And I have a lot of authoritative books by Muslims, including some of the earliest biographies and the most authoritative biography probably ever written on Muhammad. So, we try to use a lot of, sources that are still considered authoritative, but in English.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And, another thing too is even translations of the Quran. There are some really terrible English translations that try to whitewash problematic areas and things like that.
Oh, absolutely. I would consider mine more of a fundamentalist version. Like they don't whitewash anything, which is why I like it.
Yeah, good.
And then you go to the bookstores and you look at other ones and I'm like, wow, that's a very different explanation. They're spiritualizing it all.
Yeah, exactly. What exactly is what's the name of that translation?
This is Maulana Muhammad Ali.
Okay.
So it's, if you could see it there.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't know if you can or not.
Well, it's good to know. Good to know, because there's several of them, and like I said, a lot of them are just don't reflect what's actually being said in Arabic. So there's a language barrier, there's translation barrier, there's all sorts of different barriers.
Yeah, and I know Islam, we'll talk about this, in a few minutes, I'm sure, but, Islam talks about how the Quran is unchanged. They've never even changed a single letter in the Quran since it was written, and that is the miracle that Muhammad had, and it was a miracle. And I say, well, I have Qurans that differ from each other. And they're like, no, it has to be in the original Arabic. I'm like, how is that a miracle? Now, if all of the, translations in every language preserved, now that would be a miracle. But of course, it's not preserved in any language, not even in the original Arabic. So none of their arguments really hold up.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, the perfect preservation argument. Which has come under fire because it turns out there's actually a lot of different Arabic versions of the Quran.
Yeah.
It's just Muslims aren't familiar with them because they're like different localities.
Or they just don't want to think about them. And that's one of the things Islam does, is they tend to ignore things that don't fit their narrative, and then they just insult you and condemn you and call you liars and, just saying that people have lied to you and now you're lying to others and you have no information. You haven't ever read a book on the subject. You haven't read the Quran yourself, and they just attack you. And I actually posted probably 4 posts recently on my TikTok on Islam. And I was struggling to get even 1,000 views, 2,000 views on videos recently. And then I made one on Islam and it has over 50,000 views right now. And I was like, if you want to, just imagine taking a really big baseball bat and whacking a big beehive. Anytime you post on Islam, that's what you're going to get, is just all these Muslims commenting and commenting and commenting. And I mean, I think there's 2,387 comments on that one video right now, if that gives you an indication. I made 3 subsequent videos, but...
Wow. Well, why don't we start at the beginning? Because people, I'm sure, have heard of Muslims or Islam, maybe not really understand what's the foundational story. How does it come about? How does it view the world?
Yeah, Islam came out, in over 600 years after Jesus Christ. I mean, Christians had spent 600 years preaching the gospel, doing missionary work, trying to share the good news of Jesus Christ and loving everybody. And we made so much progress converting pagan nations to Christ and to Christianity through love, through preaching, through service work, and just through our unity and our good example. And then kind of like William Carroll, he has his first chapter in his history book set. It's a 6-volume history book set, and it's called A Whirlwind in the Desert. And that's pretty much how Islam came about. It's like a whirlwind. And a man named Muhammad, he came about and he was the founder of Islam. And supposedly he had some revelations from the angel Gabriel in a cave. And the angel Gabriel dictated to him what he should write down. And as Muhammad said, I can't write, I'm illiterate. And he told him, he got really fierce and angry with him and started shaking him and told him to write. And he said, but I can't write, I don't know how. And he got even angrier. And the long and short of it, he somehow memorized all the messages, revelations that the angel gave him. And over time, he started committing those to other people who started committing them to memory. And this is how later on we would get the Quran, is because they all were memorized bit by bit. I mean, this is a really thick book. And all of this was memorized by different people who then ended up committing it to paper and writing it down. What most Muslims don't know or won't tell you is that when Muhammad first had his vision, he didn't think it was an angel at all. He never considered it an angel. He considered it more of a demon, or what in Islam, what they would call a jinn, which is something in between a demon and an angel. It's kind of like a jokester kind of, a prankster
Genie.
kind of.
Yeah.
Genie. Yeah, like a genie. Exactly. And so he believed a jinn appeared to him. And actually, the way it shook him and the way it spoke to him, he was scared for his life. The life of Muhammad, which is his original biographer, said he was suicidal. Like he was considering killing himself because it shook him so much. He actually thought it was like the devil or something. And his wife was the one who changed his mind. And he was 25 at the time, and his wife was 40. Her name was Khadija. And she ended up convincing him that it was an angel in one of the weirdest ways possible, too. Basically, hey, sit on my right leg, and if you feel something, then it was an angel. If you sit on my left leg, if you don't, there's just so weird, nothing to do with reality or facts or anything else. But she eventually convinced him that it was an angel. Long story short, he ended up going out and preaching this message of one God, and to a pagan nation around him who believed in many gods, who believed in idols, who believed in all of these things. And they didn't accept his message. And needless to say, they kept driving him out. And eventually they kicked him out of Mecca, and he ended up fleeing to Medina and raising an army there, and came back and was going to sack Mecca, but they all kind of surrendered. And Muhammad did something that no other Muslim, or Arab, I should say, Arab was able to do. And he was able to unite all of the warring clans of the Arabs under one banner. And he fortified this enormous army. And it was at the perfect time in history, too, because up till this time, this is around the year 640 or so, and up till this time, Rome and Persia had been at war with each other, just wreaking havoc on each other's countries, to a point. I don't know if you've ever played the game Risk, Gary, but they have all these armies on the board, and you kill each other so much that you don't have any left. That's how Rome and Persia came, and they didn't have any armies left to keep fighting each other. They had worn each other out and couldn't even defend each other against each other. They were both worn out. And it was at this time that the enormous army of Islam came onto the scene and just walked over the Persian Empire, walked over the Roman Empire, just decimated, took over 2 of the 3 major empires on earth. I mean, Muhammad spent the rest of his days on the battlefield, leading his armies into battle. And after he died, from the year 657 to 757, 100 years, they conquered everything from Afghanistan all the way over to North Africa and into Europe, the islands and everything in between, the entire Middle East. And basically they had conquered a lot of the world, maybe 2/3, perhaps a little less than 2/3 of the world. And they were going to push into Europe and try to take the Byzantine Empire, which was the last major empire on earth. I mean, that's a very short history of how Islam came about.
Let's talk about the Quran. How about that? Because, like we said before, it isn't like Muhammad wrote this down or had a stenographer or something like that. It really is a messy endeavor, isn't it?
Yeah, it really was. And I looked it up during the break, and Muhammad actually died in 632 from an illness. After he went on pilgrimage with thousands of Muslims, he went home and for 3 months and later died from a short illness. So that's how he died.
Yeah, great. Awesome. Yeah, I'm terrible with dates. That's why I'm trying to figure out, approximately when he lived and died. But so, yeah, the Quran. So there was actually, the earliest Quran is different than the one that is now the canonical Quran, right? Because
well, yes, exactly. So back in the day after Muhammad, he had committed this to many different people, right? But apparently they remembered it in different ways because they all wrote down different things. I mean, some of these, they'll say that the Quran in Arabic is unchanged down to the letter. And this is proof that it's a miracle from God. Like the Arabic translation of the Quran has never changed, not even a letter, they say. But what they won't tell you is that there's not one translation of the Quran. There's several translations of the Quran. In fact, one of the most authoritative is by Al-Masud. And just between him and Zayd, which was the one that came to be authoritative in the end, Abuda and some others, there's literally thousands of translational variances. Sometimes they include whole surahs and surahs are like Bible verses. They call them surahs. But there's whole surahs where they just don't exist in some, where they do exist in others. And even Muslims are asking online, if you go to Quora, that website, they're like, how come different Muslim translations have a different amount of surahs? I thought the Quran was the same thing, but yet there's different Qurans with different surahs, like they're all numbered differently. So how do we know which ones are correct? How do we know which ones are right? How do we even know which one has the right amount of surahs and the other ones don't? So there's a lot of questions. Even in the early translations, this is really interesting that in the early translations, they didn't really know what to do with them. So a man named Uthman ended up kind of just canonizing he chose one of the translations and ordered all the other ones to be destroyed. And some of the other people would not give up their translation because some of these other scholars were pretty much considered the most authoritative scholars in Islam. And they were like, we're not giving up our translations. And so there came to be different translations that we know today. And I think it's important to know that what Muslims use today was decided on, I think it was 2 decades after Muhammad died. Within those 2 decades, there were many different accepted Qurans. There were many different accepted translations, but they all differed from each other. So this one man, not Muhammad, took them all and took this one and he made it the official canonized Quran, and he kind of just got rid of all the rest and said, oh, those are just variances. Those aren't the real Quran. But in fact, some of those probably had more authority than this one did, because it's not like this was Muhammad's translation. It was Zayd's translation. So it was a mess, and it still kind of is. And then there's the problem, which Muslims really, really don't like to think about, is that all of the earliest Muslim scholars and historians talk about the fact that Muhammad was duped by Satan and that he accidentally put what are known as satanic verses in the Quran. And what I tell Muslims is that this alone proves that the Quran was not unchanged. This proves that it was changed because he had to then take out the satanic verses, which, of course, many Muslims, what people have to understand is that Muslims, many times, not always, there's some good scholars, but many times the average person is just completely irrational. where Muslims used to be great scholars, mathematicians, scientists, that was taken away in I believe, the 13th century, with one caliph said, you can't understand God. You can't understand his world. There's no rational thought. And so he refused to let them do science and math and that sort of thing in the same way that they used to. And so it's kind of gone downhill, where sometimes you feel like you're talking to kids and they don't rationalize the same way. Let me give you one example before I get back onto this point.
Okay.
The terrorist group, his son, one of the terrorist groups, the son of the main leader who ran the whole thing, converted to Christianity. And he said, that's not true. The Christians are a bunch of liars. Why would we ever believe Christians? And they showed him an interview of his son. He said, no, that didn't happen. They made him say that. They got him drunk and then they paid him to say it. He would never say that. And no matter how many people told him, they just refused to believe. And they tried to find every excuse. They just wouldn't deal in reality. And many Muslims do that too. They're like, the satanic verses aren't true. Christians made that up, or that's been debunked 100 times. But the fact is, it's talked about in the earliest Muslim histories and biographies of Muhammad. They have the whole quotes of what used to be in there, where he's praising the gods, like multiple gods of the day. And the pagans were so happy that he praised and endorsed his gods. And later he was like, oh, actually, that's not from God. And he had to take those verses out. And some Muslim scholars kind of debate on how many verses need to be abrogated. But the point is, the Quran is not the perfect manual that they think it is. It's not unchanging. And as much as they like to poke fun at the Bible and how we don't have the original manuscripts, we can prove that the Bible is a reliable manuscript, whereas the Quran is not as perfect as they want it to be.
Yeah, and actually you raised a really important point, well, several real important points. For one thing, if Muhammad could be susceptible to possession and actually write Quran that what didn't come from God, once that happens, that's the camel's nose under the tent. How do you know it doesn't happen elsewhere? How do you know the whole thing isn't, the product of demonic influence?
Right. If it really wasn't an angel and it really was a jinn or evil spirit, I mean, he claimed that this came from the angel Gabriel, the same angel Gabriel who appeared to Mary, but they're two completely different gospels. And the Bible says in 1 Galatians that if someone comes to you, even an angel from heaven comes to you with a different gospel, let that angel or person be accursed. So don't accept anything, no matter who or what they are, if it contradicts the message that Jesus Christ gave us. And the Quran, Mormonism, all of these new religions definitely contradict the gospel and the teachings that Jesus Christ gave us. I mean, they don't even believe that Jesus is God. They believe he's not even the Son of God. In fact, that is the only unforgivable sin in the religion of Islam, is attributing a son or an equal to God. And that's known as the sin of shirk. And it's unforgivable. And you're pretty much damned to hell for doing it, which is why Christians, or the people of the book, were told in the Quran to be hunted down and killed, because we're infidels and heretics. And we just, we're basically abominations to God.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good. And, the other thing too is abrogation. This is something that I think a lot of Christians aren't aware of. Just because it's in the Quran doesn't mean it's currently standing as authoritative. There are surahs in the Quran that are abrogated. And so a Muslim can point you to a surah that they want you to accept, but actually it's abrogated. It's no longer in effect.
Or it's not as authoritative as other surahs would be. Like, right. So if it was abrogated or kind of downgraded, there are other ones that took its place that would be more prime or authoritative. And they also, Muslims do have what, similar to Christians, they used to have a caliph, which would be like the Pope. They do have the Quran, which is like the scriptures, and they do have tradition, which in their religion is called the hadiths. And those are considered word of God too. Those are very authoritative texts, and those go alongside the Quran and help you to understand it, give it more of a context, similar to our tradition. But many of the hadiths talk about these stories. They talk about the abrogations, the surahs, and that sort of thing as well. So, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And the other thing, too, is the surahs aren't in any chronological order, isn't it? It's by the length, right? Right.
Yes, exactly.
So you can't pick it up and read it like a gospel and there's a story, that runs through it, it jumps around, and so you have to understand the Quran in light of when it was written, right? In order to put it in chronological order. And like
Yeah,
you
the
said, there's
historical
so
context, exactly.
yeah.
And the Bible's similar. I mean, many people think the Old Testament's in chronological order too, but it kind of hops around as well.
Right.
But I think it's more of a coherent story than the Quran. The Muslims are always, just read the Quran. You've never read the Quran. I'm like, yes, I have one. Yes, I've read it. I wouldn't read all of it because it's so boring and so just silly. I mean, apparently God has a she camel. Yes, he has his own she camel. So there's just stuff that I can't take seriously in the Quran.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good. So, so you as a Catholic apologist, there's a lot to talk. Oh, one other point before we get to doing apologetics with Muslims is, you already touched on this too, but it's important to point out there is no magisterium for Islam. So in many ways, it's almost like Protestantism, isn't it?
Yes, 100% true, 100%. And some would argue they have as many or almost as many denominations as Protestants do. They have several main denominations, obviously Sunni, being the biggest one, but they also have Shiite, and they also have some other ones, pretty big ones as well. And they kind of all warred against each other. And in fact, when Islam was trying to take over the world, they almost succeeded a couple of times. Literally, like, the Christians in the rest of the world were powerless to stand up against their huge armies. The only thing that saved the world was the infighting and the bickering between different Muslims and different theologies. And sometimes they ended up turning on each other and wiping each other out. And that was the only way that big army would have been destroyed. And I don't know if it was like God just kind of pointing and making it happen or what, but yeah, there's been a ton of different Islamic traditions and beliefs, even to Sufism, which is considered similar to Kabbalah in Judaism, which is like a new age sort of mysticism of Islam. And Kabbalah is more of a pseudo new age mysticism of Judaism. So yeah, a lot of different types of Muslims out there.
There's one more thing I want to cover before we get to some of your videos that you've had on engaging Islam. And that is this idea of lying for religion. We encountered lying for the kingdom with Mormons. You have theocratic war strategy with Jehovah's Witnesses. But you also have taqiyya with Islam.
Right. Yes, exactly. And one of my friends who's an Islamic scholar, and in fact, he's gone to their conferences undercover because he speaks fluent Arabic and such. And he hears a lot of what they have to say, and he gets it, when there's no other people there, they can speak freely. And he hears about this sort of thing all of the time, where you're allowed to lie to preserve the truth of Islam, or to even promote and forward the truth of Islam. And it's even encouraged. And so one of the things you'll hear all the time, I mean, we know that Islam had 1,400 years of warfare. And we could do this in another show, but this is why the Crusades were started. The Crusades were not started just to, attack people or just to take the Holy Land for no reason. They were started in wars of self-defense to protect the Byzantine Empire from the invading Muslims, to protect Christians who were being killed from around the world, and to protect the passage to the Holy Land, because thousands and thousands of innocent pilgrims were being massacred by Islamic armies, and they were unarmed. And so, the Catholic Church did this in self-defense. But what the Muslims will tell you and lie to you to say is that, though, the Christians just started attacking everyone, and so we had to defend ourselves, when there's no historical truth to that. Second, they'll tell you that the word Islam means peace. That is like a huge talking point for Islam. They'll say Islam means peace. And it's similar to a word named salah. I mean, it's similar to a word that means peace, but the word Islam actually means submit. And they come to peace by making everyone in the world submit to Allah. And when everyone is Muslim, then there will be peace. So they lie about it and they skew it, and they put half-truths in there. I've even had Muslims tell me, shirk, the biggest sin in Islam. You'll hear them say, oh, well, you know what? We're all sons of God. That's great. Jesus was a son of God. We're all sons of God. And this is like heresy in, Islam, and they try to, spiritualize it and that sort of thing. But they'll do whatever they can to get you over there and to help really convert the world to Islam. That's what their goal is.
Yeah, yeah. So it's very important. Catholic apologists ought to know that you're not always going to get the straight scoop. They're a lot like Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons in that they'll be willing to kind of gloss over, whitewash, change, even deceive people on certain points if it seems it would go against Islam.
A lot of anti-Catholic Protestants do that as well. They completely ignore the facts. I just made one video. I don't know if you've heard of Robert Breaker. I think he's a Seventh-day Adventist maybe. Yeah. But he has one video called Why I Am Not a Catholic, Why I'm Not a Roman Catholic. And it's about a 45-minute video. And we spent 3 45-minute videos debunking it. And there was so much more we could have said. And like one of the things he says is that, when you pray the rosary, you go to the first bead and then you go around to each bead, and that's 6. And then you go around 3 times. And so that's 666. I just put the video up last night. And I said, what is this guy talking about? He's not even, there's first of all, there's 5 decades, not 6. Second of all, you don't go around more than once. And on the first bead, he says, on the first bead, you say Jesus, Mary, or Joseph, or something like that. I'm like, no, you don't say any of that, in fact. So these people don't do the research, and they don't live in reality. They only want to prove their point, and they don't even care if the facts are straight. And it's really sad.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, good point. Good point. I don't know. It's
you'll enjoy that debunking, Gary. Just
I saw the thumbnails. I have it on deck for watch later, so I'll definitely tackle that because I enjoy your debunking videos. Yeah, so tell us a little bit about some of the videos and other things that you put up in regards to Islam. So you already mentioned the perfect preservation problem.
Yeah, the perfect. Yeah, so Muslims were kind of making fun of Christians. They were saying, that you don't even have the original documents of the Bible. Why could we trust the Bible? And I said, well, because the Catholic Church made the Bible, first of all, and we were the only ones who had access to the original translation of the Bible, to the original documents, the inspired documents. So all our Bible, the original Douay Rheims, is the Bible that comes down from the earliest centuries and comes from the original documents. So I don't see a problem why we don't need to have the originals today. And if we don't have the originals today, you can probably blame you guys because you made war and burned libraries and everything else, along with the Vikings and barbarians. And I mean, we endured for 400 years of just being attacked and burned and everything else over and over. And we just kept moving the books around and copying them. But it's not a surprise that we don't have the originals with the Dark Ages and 400 years of war going on. But sorry, I just forgot your original question.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, no. We were going through some of your videos on Islam, but even the natural elements documents just don't survive, unless they're buried in the desert or, there's just natural corruption going on. So yeah, it's not surprising.
So on our YouTube video, we're going to be making some extensive ones, but on our YouTube video, we have a couple converts from Islam to Christianity, and then we have Michael Nazir Ali, who was the big Anglican bishop convert. He's also one of the top Islamic scholars in the world. We interviewed him, and he gave the history of Islam and some of the very problematic beliefs of Islam, even today, like Sharia law and that sort of thing. Very interesting if people want to watch that. But then on our I have debunking a Muslim, debunking another Muslim, debunking another, because I have all these Muslims who are like, I can debunk the Trinity in 30 seconds. And another one's like, I'm going to debunk the Christian God in 30 seconds. And so I say, well, I'm going to debunk their debunks in 30 seconds. And that's kind of what set them off. And so we talk about a lot of them. And I made one. I said, why would you ever follow Muhammad when you could follow Jesus Christ? I was like, Jesus Christ did miracles on command. He healed the blind, he healed the sick, he healed the deaf, the diseased, the lame. What did Muhammad do? Nothing. In the Quran, they asked him, do miracles for us. He said, I can't, I'm just a man. I said, exactly, he's just a man. I said, Jesus Christ forgave sins, and he had the authority to forgive sins, he said, whereas Muhammad could not. I said, Jesus Christ rose the dead. He rose people from the dead. Muhammad did not. And in fact, Jesus rose himself from the dead. He himself rose from the dead, and Muhammad is still in the grave. And Muslims teach in the Quran that Jesus did miracles even as a baby, even as a child, and he could speak as a baby, whereas they say Muhammad can't. And in fact, they said, besides Muhammad, Jesus Christ is the most mentioned person in the Quran. son. And so they have a very big esteem for Jesus and Mary, but they don't know who they are. So I said, Jesus can do all of these things. Muhammad could do nothing except supposedly he flew to the moon on a flying unicorn and he split the moon. And that's supposed to be his big miracle, except that nobody saw it. Nobody would ever believe it. And it's not actually real. So besides that, there's no verifiable miracles or anything for Muslims. So I said, if you're going to follow one person or the other, one person's resume is much bigger and much greater and much more awesome than the others, who really is just a supposed prophet. And they said, well, Jesus is a prophet too. And I said, no, Jesus is the eternal word of God. Even the Quran calls Jesus the word of God. I said, Jesus is the eternal word, wisdom, and power of God, who lived within God for all eternity. And that's how inextricably linked he is, one with God. And that God became a man. So your creator became a man, and he had a divine nature and a human nature. And this is their biggest problem, is they don't understand Jesus. And I said, he took on a human nature, but he originally was God. So that was one video we did, kind of clarifying those things. And I'm going to clarify them more as well, because Muslims don't even live in reality. They're one of the few religions that just don't do research many times. They'll say like, oh, well, Jews believe in the true God, Muslims believe in the true God, but Christians, they believe in three gods. Even though we've said this probably 10 million times, that we don't believe in three gods, but one God. They still say, nope, you believe in three gods. And I'm like, can you show me anywhere where we've taught that? Can you produce a document? Can you produce a council? Can you produce any writing where a Catholic has said that we believe in three gods? And yet they just keep repeating it because it fits their talking points.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, doesn't the Quran say that Allah doesn't have a son because he doesn't have a consort to have a son?
Yes,
so there's no
that's one of the
Mrs. Allah.
videos. It's one of the videos I debunked. This Muslim came up to me. He's like, I'm going to disprove the Christian God in 30 seconds. He's like, Jesus is the son of God. So either number one, God had a concubine. He was married. Number two, Jesus is adopted. Or number three, it's symbolic. So he said God didn't have a concubine. He didn't produce a son. He's not adopted. Therefore, he has to be symbolic. And this disproves the whole Catholic faith. And I said, wow, I don't even know where to begin with that. They don't, these are the people who these are the influencers who have hundreds of thousands of followers, and they haven't even done the most basic understanding of what Christians believe of God. But many Christians can't even understand or try to explain the Trinity either. So I think it's good. And on my YouTube channel coming up soon, we're going to do several videos on the Trinity and the divinity of Christ and that sort of thing. One guy said, I could disprove the Trinity in like 20 seconds. He's like, Jesus was either dependent on God or he was independent of God. And if he was dependent on God, then he's not God. If he was independent of God, then he's still not God. Done. Checkmate, Christians. And I said, that doesn't make any sense. I said, you didn't consider the possibility that Jesus is God. If Jesus is God, then he's not independent of God. And if he is God, then he's not dependent on God. And almost every Muslim's like, you didn't even answer the question. I'm like, no, you just didn't comprehend the answer. Go listen to it again. I was like, basically, like, Jesus is not dependent or independent. He's distinct from the Father, but they are one in being. They are one in nature. They are one in essence, distinct in person. And we could talk about that maybe next time on the show.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. This whole subject would be tons of shows, lots of fun. And yeah. And I think that's why the internet is responsible for a lot of Muslims leaving Islam, is because now they can access Christian videos like the stuff on your channel and at least hear from the horse's mouth what Christians actually do believe instead of what the leaders say we believe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yes. Absolutely.
Okay, so Brian, tell us how to get to your channel, what's cooking, what's coming up.
Well, we have lots of speaking engagements, lots of confirmation retreats and that sort of thing. So if anyone would like us to come to your parish, check out our website at catholictruth.org. Now it's just catholictruth.org. And we also have a YouTube site called Catholic Truth. We have a Catholic Truth podcast. Definitely check those out. And check out our social media, just hashtag Catholic Truth, TikTok.
Awesome. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
All right. Brian Mercier. Yeah, check out his stuff. Great stuff out there.